Welcome to another edition of the Mangxiety Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about 3, maybe 4 if I throw it in, depending on how I feel, hidden forces that essentially block you, stop you from being able to have relationships that feel secure. And this is for you if you are finding yourself in a should I stay or go scenario, or you are still healing from a breakup. There was a breakdown in a relationship dynamic. You are now facing what's called a ruptured attachment, going through the grief and the kind of essentially the attachment trauma of a breakup. It honestly feels like death for a lot of people, and you want to make sure that you don't keep repeating the pattern, repeating the cycle. And what I want to share with you is a little bit of an insight for you on where these patterns come from, and 3 hidden blind spots that you might want to look at. They're hidden forces because they're unconscious. You don't know that they're happening. Sometimes you don't even have any language to describe it. By the way, if you haven't met me before, my name's Dr. Nima Rahmani. I'm a retired chiropractor and founder of the Cycle Breakers Academy for people who are wanting to heal their insecure attachment, either the anxious or the avoidant, and create secure relationships that feel polarized, what I call conscious polarity. So on today's episode, I really wanted to go through 3, maybe 4, if it comes through, the hidden forces that actually stop us from being able to create secure relationships with what I call conscious polarity. And it's really frustrating when you are experiencing relationships where you just don't feel like you're connected, where you feel like you're alone, even if you're with a partner. Even if you've been married for 20 years, the experience feels like you're alone, like you're doing it by yourself, like the person doesn't see you, doesn't understand you, doesn't really care about your feelings, and is constantly bringing up their own victim story every time you want to connect. They don't have the capacity to hold on to your emotions. They turn it around on you, and you go through what's called the anxious avoidant dance, where your desire for connection, one of your desires for connection, causes the other person to feel overwhelmed and want to push away, which causes the anxious persons to get triggered and try to pine after more connection, become more controlling, more frustrated, more resentful. And on the other side of this activation, their attempts to connect are met with resistance, and you're too sensitive. You go do therapy. Why don't you leave me alone? And this I hate you push-pull dynamic. One minute you are like the most amazing thing. At one time, you were pedestalized as like God's gift to humanity and the savior of their lives. And then the next minute, or within about 6 months to 18 months of the relationship, after that initial honeymoon phase is over, you're now in the second phase called the power struggle phase, where you're now not conscious and a conscious adult in the relationship, even if you're in your 50s and 60s, even if you're a grandparent as well. Our oldest person in our community is an octogenarian. She's 81 years old. So even if you're that old, even if you should be acting like a older type of person, you find yourself stuck in these little immature high school drama-filled dynamics. And I want to bring some language to this experience. If you resonate, let me know in the comments or DMs if you can resonate with this. Give me your backstory. I'm curious. I'm listening. I want to know what it's like for you, because tell me if this resonates with you, where it starts off in this initial love bombing phase. This is where you're pedestalizing one another, and you call it love at first sight, but it's not actually love at first sight. You fall in love with yourself through the gaze of the other, right? It's the initial kind of love, the initial phases of the trauma bond where it's the love bombing, pedestalizing, and the narcissist and the codependent in these trauma bonded dynamics. And by the way, you can flip back and forth depending on the relational dynamic. Usually the narcissist starts off anxiously attached, but as soon as the connection happens, they switch to becoming the avoidant. And the codependent one, if you're usually a boundaryless, codependent people pleaser, you are a perfect match for that type of partner. And by the way, It's not just about men being the narcissist. The woman can be the narcissist as well. The woman, the female narcissist, very similar in my situation, doesn't do love bombing, will use sex bombing. So love bombing by the man, sex bombing by the woman, by the female. And so what happens is that lowers the defenses of the codependent in that moment. And all of a sudden you fall in love, not with the other person, but you fall in love with the idealized version of yourself. Okay, so this dynamic of this fantasy kind of like knight in shining armor person that's going to rescue me is a perfect for a trauma bond to happen, because it works out to be a co-rescuing operation where the narcissist and the codependent strike a deal with one another. And here's the deal. They say, I'm going to be the mother. I'm going to love you like the mother that you never had. Right? So the foundation of this relational dynamic, in order to heal this should I stay or go dynamic, we have to teach people how to get to the root of it. So we go back in time and see where this all began, and it began in childhood. The experience of your childlike self not feeling seen. So it creates this fantasy of somebody down the road that in my relational dynamic is going to fill the gaps that were implanted in this childhood dynamic where I wasn't seen. And in the love bombing / sex bombing stage of the relationship, what happens is you unconsciously strike a deal, the narcissist and the codependent, which are kind of like mirror images of one another, because there's codependence, there's codependency within the narcissist, and there's definitely narcissism, more like a covert narcissism in every codependent. So there's always a mirror shadow reflection of one another, which is very confronting to a lot of people, because they usually, when they're kind of starting off in this journey and they're seeing other coaches and therapists, they're just used to saying he was the narcissist. They haven't gotten to that level of awareness that, hey, wait a second, I'm not just the victim here. I can see myself as also having a part to play without putting blame to anybody. But the people, if you're watching my content, it's because you've gone down that route and you're ready to have more of a mature conversation about responsibility rather than about fault and blame. This is what I love about my audience, is they've done all the narc abuse forums. They've watched every video on narcissistic personalities talking about their ex. They've done all the therapies and the forums where they were living in victimhood. And then they're like, wait, I'm not getting anywhere. And then they find my work. It's confronting, because what I do is I encourage people instead of pointing the finger, is to look back towards yourself, to take that responsibility without blame so that you can co-create a different relationship. So this is why you're here. And if it offends you, then you don't have to listen. But if you're curious and willing to be activated and confronted, let's dive in a little bit deeper, shall we? And go over the 3 hidden forces that are causing this dynamic. The foundation being the love bombing. And then after about 6 months to a year, that disappointment happens. There's that experience that happens, which tests every relationship. But when you're in a trauma bond, it is this massive disappointment, this depolarization where the trust is broken, and now you're confronted by these unconscious childhood dynamics. You now skip from the honeymoon phase to the next phase, where it's the power struggle phase, where the avoidant starts to feel engulfed. I need space. I need space. This is too much. Or this can happen after an argument, where you remind them of a parent figure and then they feel like they have to be responsible. Or it could happen after a beautiful, intimate encounter, after an orgasm, after some sort of a real deep connection. And then what ends up happening is this experience of love and intimacy is fucking terrifying to our avoidant parts, or even our parts that have anxious attachment, these fear of abandonment parts, the 2 anxieties that are within all of us from unresolved childhood patterns. And now this fear of abandonment shows up, gets activated because of a beautiful encounter, which then triggers this coping strategy of avoidance or ultra controlling. Whatever the case is, there is this depolarization, this one event that completely disappoints and breaks the foundation of the fantasy and grounds you into a reality of what the real reason why intimate partnerships exist potentially, which is to help you heal these patterns if you're willing to learn the skills. So if you can relate to what I'm sharing so far, type in the chat, let me know. I'm curious. I want to give you the background because there's three hidden forces and I'm getting to it now. I'm just going to run through it really quick. And then you let me know what came up for you in this. How does this relate to you? And the first one is because of those childhood dynamics, the first hidden force that's blocking you is called enmeshment trauma. Enmeshment is when there is no boundary between you and another person. When there is separation from their emotional state, their values with you because of a childhood dynamic you grew up with, which you had to eclipse and stomp over and break boundaries in order to be connected. You adapt by creating an identity that just fawns and people pleases and is ultra empathic and is hypersensitive and hyper attuned to the moods of other people. And this lack of boundary causes this hypersensitivity where you get triggered and now their moods become your moods. If there is no separation, it's great when the things are going amazing. When things are high and you're doing amazing, it's fucking awesome. But when their mood shifts or they get triggered or activated, it's chaos for somebody with unresolved enmeshment trauma. I don't care if you've been doing feminine communication, polarized communication for 2 years. If you haven't dealt with this, 5 years even, if you haven't dealt with this enmeshment trauma, there's an unconscious complex that is paralyzing your chances of having a successful relationship, which leads to number two. Number two, because of that enmeshment trauma, it creates a culture of codependency where you're dependent on fixing the other person, where you will abandon yourself to save and rescue the other person because their internal lack of safety, their depression, their addiction becomes your responsibility and there's no separation and you have to eclipse yourself. And ultimately, it's unfulfilling because when you abandon yourself, you can't abandon yourself without simultaneously creating a resentment. So those with codependent are constantly living with resentment all the time, feeling victimized, constantly basing your own moods on the other person. I don't care if you've been doing polarized communication and feminine communication. 5 years I've been in polarity groups where people were learning the communication without doing this work and they were struggling and it was a fucking gong show. So it's really important that all of your communication things you learn are done so on the other side of healing those enmeshment patterns and codependency, which leads us to number three. The third hidden force that's stopping you is what's called, Freud called it repetition compulsion. Repetition compulsion is a compulsion within all of us to seek out partners that repeat those patterns of enmeshment and codependency, just like when we were children. Why would that happen? Why would there be such a cruel twist of fate? Well, I'm glad you asked. I had asked myself that question after I healed from my last relationship, trauma bond, and now have created a secure relationship. And I realized through the journey, because it's a path to healing those things, it can't happen overnight, but there is an unconscious desire for younger parts of you to seek healing, for you to stop looking outside of you for validation, and for you to heal those missing pieces. And until you do, if you don't, you are forever seeking resolution outside of you, going from one narcissist to the other, from one rescue operation to another, from one damsel in distress to another, to validate your self-worth as a man. That was me. Until you fully do the work and become trigger-proof, and then heal from enmeshment trauma, dismantle the codependency, and break free from the pattern of the repetition compulsion, you experience a sense of freedom. You stop fawning and people-pleasing. All the feminine communication actually becomes embodied, and the relationships outside of you start to mirror the relationship that you're building within yourself. So, enmeshment trauma, codependency, and repetition compulsion, those are the hidden forces, and hopefully this was of value to you. If you are ready to do the practices and the neurosensory exercise and practices to break free from this, send me a DM. And what I'd like to know, or hit that reply, email me back, just email me, let me know what your backstory is and everything that you've tried, communication courses, so that I can kind of look at it and see if there's any blind spots that I can help you with. If you've done the work, if you've done your practices, you've done the therapy, you've invested in yourself, but you're still feeling stuck, then I would love to hear more. And if you're open to hearing some blind spots of what could be missing in your journey, I'm happy to share with you with under no obligation whatsoever. It's been a great market research for me because it helps me direct the content that I'm sharing with people. And the conversations I've had have been super duper amazing because I get to meet people who've been following my work sometimes 3 or 4 years. And just to hear them, share their appreciation, totally worth it. And I'm opening up some spaces in my calendar for the right person who is willing to share with me their backstory, what they've tried, and why it's important to them. Why is this now an important situation? How has this been impacting your children? Because lack of enmeshment trauma, unwittingly, you could try to be the greatest mother, greatest father. But with enmeshment trauma, we become enmeshed with our children. And then they start to mimic the same patterns. And so I'm committed to those who are willing to go deeper, to look in a mirror rather than trying to point fingers and blame the other person, who's willing to throw away the word blame and fault and actually joyfully, playfully, with a lot of fun, and doesn't mind the odd F-bomb here and again, once in a while, send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you and tell me what specifically questions you have, and I'd like to make more content for you. See you at the next perfect time.